This is a server that I picked up yesterday from the side of the road. As I received it, um, it had not a whole lot. It had no CPUs, no heat sinks. It did have fans, has the motherboard and the SAS backplane, and it does have the riser card. I spent about 5 minutes bending this back into shape because for some reason it was horribly bent. And I suppose this is the riser cage. The actual card, which I can show you, or more precisely, what is left of the card, was not so lucky. That's not exactly. Oh, yeah, there it is. I actually went and just ripped that edge off there because it was just asking to be ripped off. As you can see, the traces peel like strings, but before I did that, it was still completely unrecoverable. I might order a new one. But yeah, the server itself came with no RAM, no CPUs. It did come with 2 good power supplies. I believe they're, I suppose we can check here. They are, does it say 460 watts? Yes. Pretty small. I believe it's the same sort of power supply that is used in their 1U servers. And this would qualify as a 2U, I believe. I suppose I can take off the card cage. It just has 5 plastic coated thumb screws that you undo, and then it basically lifts off. Although it has a bit of resistance in certain places because it's still a bit bent. There was also 2 other servers and a network switch at the side of that road at that house. My friend picked up one of the servers. I brought him the other one because I don't know, it was less hopeless than we thought, although it's still probably dead. But one of his servers is definitely working, and that's in pretty good non-corroded shape. And then the switch was very dirty, but it appeared to function just fine. But under here we can see these PCIe slots. Perhaps they're 32 link. I mean, I believe they are longer than a standard 16 link slot. Or perhaps looks are just deceiving me. And there's where the SAS backplane connections connect to it. It seems to have a fully integrated controller card because there's not much going on the backplane. Here's where the controller cache would go. I took it off because it was just not functioning properly, and the battery was nowhere to be found, so the cache wouldn't do anything anyway, but it was causing a 5-minute delay when you turned it on, so it was not very useful. It has 1 processor in it, and it's a very glorious heatsink sort of scenario. I will probably order real heatsinks, and then I'll put a second processor, which I have, which is identical to that one in there. The processors are a Xeon E5504, I believe. They're quad-core, 2 gigahertz, single-threaded, well, 4 threads, but 1 thread per core. Then these are 6 sticks of 1 gigabyte of RAM, and no RAM over here as there's no processor. This server is just pretty much a standard DL380 revision 6, or generation 6, as indicated by here. That is one thing that I wish normal computers had, is some kind of information sheet on the computer case. In terms of accessibility, or in terms of peripheral connections, there's 2 Ethernet ports here. They're probably gigabit, and I guess they're run by this Broadcom chip. And I guess we'll have to take out the power supply. We got serial. It just seems to be a standard serial port. I don't think it connects to the ILO controller or anything. This is your network interface for the ILO, which works differently than I expected. I figured it would just be like serial over Ethernet or something. But instead it appears to actually get a IP address and then host a little web server, and you can connect to that even if the server is off. It just has to be plugged in. PS2 mouse and keyboard ports. It has two more, presumably gigabit ports over here, VGA, and two USB ports, USB 2.0 ports specifically. As for internal ports and there's a trusted platform module connector, which is understandably vacant. SD card slot. I'm not sure if you can just put any old SD card in there and use it as storage, or what exactly it's for. And then there's a USB connector, and then the SATA connector for the optical drive in the front. Presumably you could repurpose it to use a hard drive, but you need some way to power it. And then there's a front panel connector with lots of stuff going on. I guess a spare power connector. This one goes for the SAS drives, and I'm not sure what you do with this one. Maybe you could double up and have two backplanes. That doesn't leave you a lot of ventilation, but I guess that would be what you would do. As you can see, there is a fair bit of dirt and junk on this thing. I almost think these might be victims, or at least presumed victims, of basement floods. Because, I don't know, they came out of someone's house, and they were corroded and dirty, so that's really the only thing I can think of. But, this one seems to work okay. I did have an issue where, as I was installing Windows Server, actually just after I installed it, the ROM image decided to corrupt, or at least the data stored in the ROM. So I needed to reset it using the bank of dip switches, specifically dip switch 6, and I started working again after that. I never looked into the exact maximum configuration of this, but I'm going to assume that it's very similar to my PowerEdge R710. That is, that you could probably get away with something in the numbers of 192 gigabytes of RAM, and probably similar processor specs. I'm sure I could put the same processors that I have in my R710 into this, which were 6-core, 12-thread, 3-ish gigahertz processors. However, these quad-core processors will do just fine. On the front, we have the LED diagnostic thing. Stuff will light up if it fails. And there's a power light and the UID light, which I guess is just if you want to mark this server for some reason. Hard drive situation is not exactly great. I've got just a junky 160 gigabyte drive in there, but there's 8 bays, and the cat won't shut up, and you got 2 more USB ports up here, VGA. I don't know, I guess he just wants to make noise. But this is kind of surprisingly only a DVD reader, and presumably also a compact disc reader. If my friend never gets the smaller server working, I might ask if I can pillage his drive, because it would be nice to be able to read and write DVDs. But there's not a whole lot else on the front. One thing that might seem familiar is that if you have one of these servers that is the 1U variant, this thing, the status thing, will most likely be a little push out card that you push it and then it pulls out the rest of the way and tilts down. However, this is just mounted vertically since there's plenty of room. And this has some kind of indication of its previous life. I'm gonna guess that that was even before it was in the house that it got dumped out to the road from. It did have mounting rails on it, but I took those off because I don't need them. And then of course there's a little tag thing. This one's super bendy, so it's fun to do this. But yes, it is pretty fancy as far as free roadside servers go. Still could use a little more cleaning and possibly some drive rails and real heat sinks, which I may indeed buy at some point in time. This heatsink does manage to keep the processor cool enough as long as I keep the fans in what is called the increased cooling mode. However, the optimal cooling mode, which is more conservative, does indeed happen to keep the processors at a sensible temperature. It's just much higher than I would like. I believe around 70 something degrees Celsius at most times. However, in the increased cooling mode, it is more like 40 Celsius, which is pretty good. And yes, that really is just a Intel stock heatsink with the fan removed. Specifically a 65 watt heatsink. This is an 80 watt processor, I believe, but at the amount of airflow that's going through here, it really does not matter. This front edge connector thing here did just so happen to clean up substantially better, possibly because it was substantially more corroded than the rest of it. It's still not great, but you know, it doesn't look nearly as bad. And then there is no such thing on the other side, at least not visible to the front, but what's on the back does not look too bad. I'm thinking that this person must have had an entire rack in the bottom of their basement or something, and what sat on the bottom of said rack was a victim of a flood of some sort. However, most of the stuff seems to have survived, which is kind of peculiar, as you know, why would he be getting rid of it if it survived? Now granted, this server stuff is sufficiently old, and that market moves on very quickly, at least in most cases, which is why server parts of anything more than maybe 4 or 5 years old are extremely cheap, which is good for people who just want some kind of server to do stuff with instead of 1,000 servers and wanting to do things as efficiently as possible. Because I'm sure when you have something in the order of hundreds or thousands of servers, it becomes quickly expensive to power electricity, and have only so much work you can do with said electricity for the particular hardware that you're dealing with. But for a person like me, who will probably never even max out the capabilities of such a server, this will do just fine. I do apologize for the screen only being moderately visible, but there's only so much I can do about the sun, other than cover it up with clouds, which it currently is, but it does not make a huge difference as far as the camera goes. So you will just have to live with the glare, or watch something else. But continuing on, I will plug the server in now, and like most any server that is freshly plugged in, you will not miss the event of it turning on. And this one does so happen to turn on automatically, though you can instruct it to not do so, or to do so after a longer wait period. And it just turned on. There's not a whole lot of fancy lights when it starts up. However, all of these drive bay indicator lights do just so happen to flash blue, orange, and green in some kind of fashion. I don't remember the exact order. But you can see that it is working on spinning up this drive, or something to that degree. and it will take a hot minute for much to happen over here, but we do have a blinking cursor. There are some diagnostic LEDs on the server motherboard, kind of like what Dell did in the dimensions and optiplexes. However, there is, I believe, 7 lights instead of 4. And furthermore, we can see the exquisite features that this has, such as all those things down there. We've got, if it'll ever focus, we've got things like a sea of sensors. The ILO2 power regulator. You know, most servers and computers don't regulate power. No. But it does tell us the ambient temperature and all that stuff. And if you do log into the ILO2 console, you can see all sorts of sensor information. Much more than I think anyone would ever need. This is probably one of the fanciest BIOS screens I remember seeing. In terms of the graphics. I would take you into setup, but there's really not much to be seen there. It's very standard and kind of lackluster as far as servers go. So I believe we have to press F1 to continue, but I wouldn't know because there's this thing in the way from that KVM. Whoops. Oh, I guess it moves on its own. But I believe if I move something, maybe the thing will go away. No, yes, I still have the Server 2003 CD in here. Now, before you armchair information security warriors go and tell me just exactly how silly I am for doing such a thing, I do have at least a moderate idea of what I'm doing. There is no less than 2 firewall routers in between here and the internet, and Server 2003, I have the firewall embedded into that, still active, so it can only be so bad. And as like any computer, I don't run random garbage on it, and this is not a production environment by any means. And I've yet to set this up or even install drivers, so that's why things might look a little bare. Now, I'm sure you might be wondering why this server is so loud for a, a 2U server, and like I mentioned earlier, it's in the increased cooling mode to deal with my very trash heatsink. I can't even imagine what maximum cooling would be like, but it is very, very quiet, almost silent most of the time in the optimal cooling mode. And as you can see here, we have our information about the particular flavor of Windows we're running. This is the 64-bit Enterprise Edition with Service Pack 2, however it is not yet otherwise updated. And it contains a Xeon, as mentioned, and 6 GB of RAM. And I've really not done anything at all with this server yet. But at some point I will. Alright, I need to type a reason. Seems like a sufficient reason to me. But yes, that is basically the overview of this server for now. And as you can see, it went into off, which for some reason is portrayed as standby not only in the manual but as in the color of the power light. It doesn't make sense to me, but that's how they did it. On once again a non-optimal screen configuration due to most laptop LCDs running off of some kind of inverted AC power to power the screen, we have some nice banding. However, I did happen to find the service manual for this DL380 G6, and I was much disappointed to learn about the fact that it only supports 144 gigabytes of RAM. Needless to say, my disappointment is immeasurable and my day has been ruined, because how will I run that 145th and beyond gigabyte of programs? and other stuff.